Hello, and welcome back to Reading War and Peace. Continuing where we left off, Volume 2, Part 5, Chapter 3. In 1811, there was living in Moscow a French doctor who quickly became the fashion. A man of immense height, handsome, amiable, as Frenchmen are, and, as all Moscow said, extraordinarily skillful in his profession, métivier. He was received in houses of high society not as a doctor, but as an equal. Prince Nikolai Andrich, who had always laughed at medical science, had recently, on the advice of Mil Borin, admitted this doctor to his presence and grown used to him. Métivier called on the prince twice a week. On St. Nicholas Day, the prince's named day, all Moscow came to his door, but he gave orders to receive no one and to invite only a few to dinner, and the list of whom he gave to Prince Marya. Métivier, arriving on that morning with his felicitations, found it appropriate in his quality as a doctor de forcer le consigne, as he said to Princess Marya, and went to see the prince. So it happened that on that morning of his name day, the old prince was in one of his worst moods. He had been going wearily about the house all morning, picking on everyone and pretending that he did not understand what was said to him, and that he himself was not understood. Princess Marya knew only too well this mood of quiet and preoccupied grumbling, which usually resolved itself in the outburst of rage, and she went about all morning as if under a loaded and cocked gun, awaiting the inevitable shot. Until the doctor's arrival, the morning had gone fairly well. Having let the doctor in, Princess Marya sat down with a book in the drawing room, from where she could hear everything that was happening in the study. First, she only heard Métivier's voice, then her father's voice, then both voices began speaking at once. The door was thrown open, and on the threshold appeared the frightened, handsome figure of Métivier, with his black forelock, and the figure of the prince in his nightcap and robe, his face distorted by rage, and the pupils of his eyes rolled downwards. "You don't understand," the prince was shouting. "But I do, French spy. Bonaparte's slave and spy out of my house. Out, I say!" And he slammed the door. Métivier, shrugging his shoulders, went over to Milborne, who, hearing the shouting, had begun running from the neighboring room. "The prince is not entirely well. L'habille à le transport, savez-vous? Très cuisez-vous, je préfère postaman," said Métivier, and putting his fingers to his lips, he hurriedly left. Behind the door, slippered footsteps were heard, and shouts, "Spies, traitors, traitors everywhere! Not a moment's peace in my house." After Métivier's departure, the old prince called his daughter to him, and all the force of his wrath fell upon her. It was her fault that a spy had been let into his rooms, yet he had told her to make it a list, and not anyone not on the list. Why had this scoundrel been let in? She was the cause of all. With her, he could not have a moment's peace. He could not die in peace, he said. "No, my dear, we must part. Let it be known to you. I cannot have it any more," he said, and left the room. And as if fearing she might somehow comfort herself, he came back, and trying to assume a calm look, added, "Don't think I said it to you in a moment of anger. I am calm, and I have thought it over, and it will be. We must part. Find yourself a place." But he could not control himself, and with that spitefulness which belongs only to someone who loves, he shook his fist at her, obviously suffering, and screamed, "If only some fool would marry her!" He slammed the door, summoned Mel Barin, and quieted down in his study. At 2 o'clock, the chosen persons gathered for dinner. The guest, the well-known Count Rasputin, Prince Lopakin, and his nephew General Chatro, the prince's old wartime friend, and of the young man Pierre and Boris Drobsky, awaited him in the drawing room. Having come to Moscow on leave a few days earlier, Boris had wished to be introduced to Prince Nikolai Andrich, and had managed to wish his favor to such degree that the prince had made an exception among all the young bachelors whom he did not receive. The prince's house was not what was known as society, but it was a small circle which, though not much talked about in town, it was very flattering to be received in. Boris had understood that a week ago, when his presence, Rastopchin had said to the commander-in-chief, in response to his invitation to dinner on St. Nicholas Day, that he could not come. On that day, I always go to venerate the relics of Prince Nikolai Andrievich. Ah, yes, yes, the commander-in-chief had said. How is he? The small company that gathered before dinner in the old-fashioned drawing-room, with its high ceiling and old furniture, resembled a solemn court in session. Everyone was silent, and if they spoke softly. Prince Nikolai Andrievich came out, serious and silent. Prince Maria seemed more quieter and timid than usual. The guests were reluctant to address her because they saw that she was not following their conversation. Count Rasputin alone maintained the thread of the conversation, telling about the latest town or political views. Lopkin and the old general took little part in the conversation. Prince Nikolai Andrievich listened as a Supreme Court justice listens to a report being made to him, only occasionally indicating by a grunt or a brief phrase that has taken into consideration what is being reported to him. The tone of the conversation made it clear that no one approved of what was happening in the political world. Events were recounted, which obviously confirmed that everything was getting worse and worse. But it was striking that in each account and opinion, the narrator stopped, or was stopped each time at that limit where disapproval might refer to the person of the sovereign emperor. Over dinner, the conversation turned to the latest political news, about Napoleon's seizure of the lands of the Duke of Oldenburg, and about a Russian note denouncing Napoleon, which had been sent to all the European courts. Bonaparte behaves with Europe like a pirate on a captured ship, said Count Rostropin, repeating a phrase he had already uttered several times. One is only astonished at the patience or blindness of the sovereigns. It has now gone as far as the Pope, and the Bonaparte, feeling no scruples, wants to overthrow the head of the Catholic religion, and everyone is silent. Only your sovereign protested against the seizure of the Duke of Oldenburg's land, and even then Count Rostropin felt silent, sensing that he was standing at the limit where no longer possible to disapprove. They offered him other lands in place of the Dukedom of Oldenburg, said Prince Nikolai Andrievich. He moves dukes around the way I move peasants from Bald Hills to Bakrokavo and my Razan's estates. Le Duc Oldenburg supporte sans mobile avec force de carrer une resignation admiral, said Boris, respectfully entering into the conversation. He said it because, on his way from Petersburg, he had the honor of being introduced to the Duke. Prince Nikolai Andrievich looked at the young man as if he wanted to tell him something about that, but changed his mind, considering him too young for it. I read our protest about the Oldenburg affair and was astonished at the poor wording of this note, Count Rostopchin said, in the careless tone of a man judging a matter that was very familiar to him. Pierre looked at Rostopchin with naive astonishment, not understanding why he was disturbed by the poor wording of the note. Does it make any difference how the note is worded, Count, he said, if the content is strong? Mon chevet, avec nos signes, saint mulihum les troops, et se fait facile d'avoir un beau style, said Count Rasputin. Pierre understood why Count Rasputin was disturbed by the wording of the note. It seems there are a lot of scribblers around, said the old prince. There in Petersburg, they're writing all the time, not only notes, but new laws. My Andrusha wrote a volume of laws of Russia there. Nowadays, everybody writes, and he laughed unnaturally. The conversation ceased for a moment. The old general cleared his throat to draw attention to himself. Did you hear about the latest evening at the review in Petersburg? What a show the new French ambassador made of himself. What's that? Yes, I heard something. He said something awkward in His Majesty's presence. His Majesty drew attention to the Grenadier Division and the ceremonial march past, the general went on, and the ambassador supposedly paid no attention to it, and supposedly allowed himself to say that we in France pay no attention to such trifles. The sovereign did not deign in reply at the next review. They say the sovereign did not die to address for him Even once, everyone fell silent. About this fact, which referred personally to the sovereign, it was impossible to express any opinion. Insolent fellow, said the prince, do you know Metivier? I threw him out today. He was there. He was let in to see me, though I asked him not to let anybody in, said the prince, looking angry at his daughter, and he recounted the whole conversation with the French doctor and the reasons why he became convinced that Metivier is a spy, though those reasons were quite insufficient and unclear, and no one objected. And the rose champagne was served. The guests got up from the places to congratulate the old prince. Maria also went up to him. He gave her a cold, angry look and offered her a wrinkled, clean-shaven cheek. The whole expression of her face told her that he had not forgotten their morning conversation, that his decision remained in force, and that it was only owing to the presence of the guest that he did not tell her so now. When they went on to the drawing room for coffee, the old men sat together. Prince Nikolai Andrich became more animated and voiced his way of thinking about the impending war. He said that our wars with Bonaparte would be unsuccessful so as long as he sought alliance with the Germans and meddled in the affairs of Europe, which he had been drawn into by the Peace of Tilsit. We had no need to fight for or against Austria. Our politics all lie in the East. And in the relation to Bonaparte, there is one thing: armed borders and firm politics. He will never dare cross Russian borders as in the year 7. And far be it from us to fight the French prince, said Count Rapotin. How can we oppose our teachers and gods? Look at our youth. Look at our ladies. The French are gods, and our kingdom of heaven is Paris. He began to speak more loudly, obviously, so that everyone could hear him. French clothes, French thoughts, French feelings. Here you threw Metivier out because he's French and a scoundrel, but our ladies go crawling after him. Yesterday, I was at a soirée, and out of the 5 ladies there were 3 Catholic, and with Pope's permission, were doing embroidery on Sunday, and they sat there all but naked, like a signboard for a public bathhouse, if I may say so. Prince, when you look at our young people, you want to take Peter the Great's old cudgel from Kashkamara and give them a good rubbing, to beat all the foolishness out of them. They all fell silent. The old prince looked at Rasputin with a smile on his face, shaking his head approvingly. Well, goodbye, your excellency. Be well, said Rasputin, getting up with his particularly quick movements and holding out his hand to the prince. Goodbye, dear heart. It's always like a harp listening to him, said the old prince, holding him by the hand and offering him his cheek for a kiss. The others got up along with Rasputin. And I'm going to leave it off there. Thank you guys so much for listening to this. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe and leave some comments below. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.